Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Bonjour, Mitch Hampton.
Bonjour, ça va?
Hi, Mitch.
Salut.
How's it going?
Oui, ça va, et toi?
Oh, très bien, merci.
Oui.
So, I think it's my turn to ask the questions on your podcast.
Oh, boy.
What do you think?
Well, that is the plan, and so you're going to be Oriana Fallaci, right? That's going to be your...
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I think...
our audience won't know who that reference, but...
well, thank God for Google. I think in terms of references, Mitch, you have such an astonishing... I don't know, like your mind really is like a giant encyclopedia. It's like Wikipedia is Mitch Hampton.
In a way, yeah, probably. Yeah.
There are times where I'm just like, wow, like the obscure things that you're able to, kind of hold in your memory. Mm-hmm. It's really amazing. And I have to, I listened to an episode that you did where you did talk about your diagnosis. Oh. And I thought, that is to me one of the most fascinating aspects of being anywhere on the spectrum is that, you have this remarkable brain that you're clearly like, kind of off the scales in terms of your retention and what you're able to process and what you're able to, kind of hold in your brain space all at the same time. So I have very, very little brain space compared to you. So I have a lot less reference a lot of the time just off the cuff than you do. So give me a minute. Sometimes I have to Google what you're talking about.
Oh, okay, well.
Every so often, you and I definitely are into a lot of similar things, but every so often I'll, hear you on your podcast and I'll have to Google like, oh, what is that? And I've actually learned a lot. And I have to say, I think your podcast is such an interesting one. Okay. Because you're a very good interviewer. I think you're really great at putting your guests at ease and drawing out, really great information from them. Your recent one with, I think it was Elizabeth Williams.
Oh, you listened to that about crime illustration.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that's a real, anybody I think who's who's into true crime in general should listen to that podcast.
Oh, well,
it is fascinating. I had no idea about some of those cases she had been involved with and her early history. I was just really floored. That was such a great podcast. I sent it on to a lot of different people. So, but I think, now it's your turn. And, I think you have to realize you yourself are a pretty fascinating cat. Okay. And I'm sure that people probably have a lot of questions, and I definitely have a lot of questions. And I think I joked with you one time that I wanted you to do a segment called Ask a Dandy, because you're a dying breed. Is that what this episode is? I mean, I didn't know really. Nah, it's not going to be just Ask a Dandy, but I do have a few questions relating to that. But it's part of the interview today. Okay. Some questions about. I guess we'll just jump right into it. Yeah. Because I don't think I've ever met a dandy before. Not a real one. Maybe one that's part-time, just likes to get dressed up for occasions, but you truly live this 24/7. Yes. And I am very curious to know what the genesis was of you becoming a dandy, and just how, what was that? What was if you could pinpoint like a moment where the seed was planted and then how that evolved?
It's actually very specific. So it's actually, in particular, the MGM movies of the 30s. Okay. So it's in particular certain Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers pictures. So the gay divorce or the gay divorcing, carefree, top hat.
Mm-hmm.
I really like kind of the clothes that of course he wore, but also in general the menswear of that period. And so I guess catching those black and white movies, I guess on television or syndication or so that may have been the very first impetus.
And do you happen to remember what age were you when you started to find yourself being drawn to that fashion aesthetic?
Well, to hold that thought, because it wasn't just that. There was actually a confluence of very disparate influences, because American Gigolo was also an influence.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Well, because I liked some of the Armani clothing in that movie that Richard Gere person wore.
That Richard Gere, yeah.
So that was also, but that's very different in cut and design. Although Armani was at that time was interested in the 30s, it's a totally different silhouette. But it's actually many. So you might say there's many influences. But as far as actual age, I guess I don't know. When I was in age 10, 11, 12. I just started wearing a coat and tie every day, so it's just something that I did, and I kind of, I never really stopped doing it. I mean, I stopped doing it when I went to boarding school. Well, hold on, because in Interlochen Arts Academy, they had a uniform.
Right.
Navy corduroy and a cheap sort of baby blue cotton shirt.
And did you like that uniform or?
I wasn't it was a uniform, but I always wore a coat and a tie with it every day. And so I was able to continue doing that. And then there were other influences, like there was a friend of mine who died at the age of 19, who was a wonderful bassist. And he was electric bass was his instrument. He really worshipped Will Lee and Marcus Miller. This is the mid 80s, right? And he really was into the Letterman band and Will Lee and he was the bassist.
Yeah, I remember that.
He was the bassist in our ensemble. I was always doing all these gigs with him. And so he was really into clothes. He was from Dearborn, Michigan. But his style was very much Miami Vice. Very,
great.
Very, he literally dressed like Crockett and Tubbs. Just kind of,
wow.
The same, and he would wear like a turquoise T-shirt underneath a cream jacket in the winter, And,
I can picture it.
He wore these Tom McCann shoes with almost no sole.
God, I remember those.
In colors like dove gray and.
Yes, I remember all of those.
Almost like a kind of a merry-go-round chess king, a little bit of merry-go-round chess king.
Oh, merry-go-round! Who doesn't remember merry-go-round?
So I think I kind of was a little influenced by him, and so then he died of a heart attack when in his first year of university in Miami. He's a star student.
That's very sad.
And because he had a genetic heart condition.
Oh man!
And so I vowed on that. I actually made a vow that I was going to dress like that the rest of my life. That would have been, it would have been 1986, 87. And I've been kind of doing it the same ever since. And it goes through cycles and decades. And
right.
That's probably too long of an answer, but maybe it's not what you're looking for.
No, I no, it's exactly what I was looking for, because I'm it's incredibly sad to hear that you lost a friend at such a young age, a friend and fellow musician, and so to know that part of your life as a dandy is a kind of an homage to him as well as
yes,
just the actual clothes.
Yeah. So.
A couple of more questions related to this. Because you live this dandy, lifestyle, like 24/7, I get the impression too that, kind of the aesthetic of your home is also very kind of 1930s, and you've got a lot of your, memorabilia up on the walls and stuff like that. Now, I don't want to get too personal, but I am very curious about what a dandy wears to sleep. Do you wear pajamas? Do you wear a nightshirt? Do you, or if you're honest, are you like the rest of us schlubs who just wear a t-shirt and underwear?
Well, I sleep in traditional pajamas. I don't sleep naked. And I don't sleep in my underwear.
Okay.
Partly because I'm more comfortable in pajamas. Mm-hmm. And it's just more comfortable than being naked in bed. I think because of the temperature, I like to keep my home sort of on the cool side. I don't like being overheated, and I'm sensitive to being overheated. So I kind of,
I'm the same way. I really overheat quickly, and I can't stand a warm or hot environment. And I'm guessing, when you're wearing a suit most of the time as well, it definitely helps to keep the room a little cooler.
A lot of people are marked on that. Actually, wearing a suit, the kind of clothes that I wear, the way that they're constructed and designed and cut is actually closer to wearing like almost a cardigan.
Oh, nice.
It's basically that comfortable. The reason why a lot of men I could speak of are uncomfortable is that they're wearing the wrong size, or they're wearing mass-produced clothes that actually don't feel well because it's made for someone else, and so that's why it's uncomfortable.
Right.
And also the fabrics aren't very good. So again, I don't want to go into the weeds of the threads too much on all this, that's actually
You do have your clothes are generally bespoke, right? You choose your fabrics. You actually go to a tailor. Everything is really made perfectly to fit you.
Yeah.
Okay. And my next question is kind of related to your love of the fashions of the 1930s, but also the fact that you have a real passion for the 1970s. You are a 1970s scholar, as a matter. And so what I have always found curious is that you love the 1970s, but you dress like the 1930s. Yeah. So, I think this makes you really interesting. It's like, to look at you, you are kind of a real blast from the past.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why you didn't develop a love for, dressing in the style of the 70s, for example, because other people, I do have some other friends who are scholars of particular eras of pop culture, especially. I got a friend who particularly loves the 60s, and everything in his house looks like the 1960s. His clothes are all very 60s. He's got a very specific kind of mod 60s aesthetic. Yep. And, that all kind of fits together. But with you, it's a little different. So can you tell me why the discrepancy, or, is there some reason that you don't wear clothes that are more evocative of the 70s?
Well, I don't like menswear from the 70s. I find it ugly, and I don't like the dimensions. I certainly don't like the color and the fabrics in the main. Women's wear from the 70s is a whole other thing. There's incredible women's wear from the 70s. So it's different, I think, for men and women, at least from my perspective. So that's the major reason for that. But, my interest in the 70s goes back to a dream I had. I don't want to get into, I had some sort of weird dream of time travel within my own lifetime. And
do we have a connection?
Yeah,
that's one of the pitfalls of trying to. I love technology; it's great, but sometimes it fails. So
there you go.
I don't know what the last.
Yeah, jumping into the 70s. So I had this vivid dream in which I went back in time. Which, given that this dream was in the 80s, was back in time about 5 or 6 years. And in the dream, I was no longer a boy, but was a man. So in other words, I wasn't the age that I would have been in the 70s. So if I was 13, I became 23 or something in this dream. And I was going to this disco, and it was just the sights and the sounds. I think the song that was playing was, I think it was Chic, I think it was Chic. It was either Chic or Rogers and one of their big hits, or it was Fly Robin Fly. Maybe it could have been that band was The Connection, the Silver Connection, or one of those one of those type of things. That was the music. And then I woke up. And, I had no idea what this dream meant. And I really didn't know. So I had to figure it out. Right. You there?
Can you hear me, Mitch?
Now I can.
We're starting to have we're getting a really spotty connection. The last thing I heard was that you had a dream where you were going to a discotheque and you were 23 years old in the dream rather than the age you were, which was around 13.
Yeah, we're up to date. And so I woke up and then I began to realize that this was a decade called the 70s. And I wanted to give the 70s my love because no one loved it. People made fun of it and hated it, and everything was about the 50s and the 60s and everything. So I considered it an orphaned era. And so I decided to become an expert on it. And so the rest is history, right? Literally,
that's a fantastic story.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fantastic story. I mean, I completely agree with you that the 70s gets, even today, I don't think it gets nearly the respect that it deserves. My favorite, I don't know about you, but I think you're on the same page with me. My favorite era of American film and television is the 1970s.
Sure.
Hands down.
Sure.
And, not to say that there's not good stuff now, but nothing really.
You and I just watched something good now, right? Did you see Halston yet? Or did you see, well, of course, Halston's about the 70s. We saw the Sons of Sam, which is about.
Yeah, the Sons of Sam. There's such, even if you're not a true crime fan, I think that the great shots of 1970s New York,
Wow.
It's worth watching just for that.
Well, you get to see Mayor Beam and press conferences, and you see all those women in Queens. And like basically arm in arm saying, we want to get this guy.
I think we even remember when that stuff was actually happening. We were kids.
Sure.
And, to be, here now watching this documentary about this thing that happened that definitely, got into our minds when we were little kids and, kind of affected the way that we see the world after that. So I love that era, even for the true crime.
Well, my feeling about it is historians make the rules about what's important. And so they're the ones that decide to make this year important as opposed to another year.
That's really true. And I really appreciate your approach to documenting the 1970s because you really get into the weeds. You really get down into the really fine grains of things that things that have just fallen through the cracks that nobody remembers ever existed. You're the guy. You're almost like an archaeologist in that way. Mm-hmm. That you're not just a historian, but you're kind of really digging up a lot of stuff that's just been long forgotten.
Well, I like material culture. I really love the fact that I have a 70s museum in my house, and I have a
Yes, I know.
I have a Citizens Band CB glass that truckers would have, like for beer and stuff.
Wow.
And I have next to it like a magic. Some kind of a mood ring and I have all these little trinkets. Now, the interesting thing about all this stuff is that it is kind of junk. And a lot of it would be worthless to a lot of people. Like it doesn't have monetary value to people, which is really great. It's really great
historical value.
Well, yeah, but that makes sense even better because it's easy to get. It doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. And then you have something you love and nobody really wants it or a lot of people don't want it. It's kind of great. I see that's maybe a selling point. I mean, I'm kind of thankful I'm not obsessed with the mid 60s and I want to get, I want to get a really valuable obituary of JFK or something. And,
right.
In New York. I don't care about that stuff at all.
Coffee table. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But that stuff's very expensive. And that's
where do you find a lot of your 70s collectibles and memorabilia? Do you go thrift store shopping? Do you go on eBay?
Not anymore. No, I'm very, I'm really into decluttered. I've always been an anti-clutter person, believe it or not. I was always ahead of the curve. I've never been a pack rat, and I've always been kind of very mindful of how much I own. And I always, I'm a Libra. I like balance. So I try to keep things balanced. So I really do a lot of. But I have been. But again, the thing about 70s stuff is that it's everywhere. Again, it's because everybody wants to get rid of it. That's the thing about writing. It's the era that keeps on giving. It's the gift that keeps on giving because people kind of don't want to get rid of their old. They want to get rid of their halter tops and get rid of their. They certainly. I mean, the TV guides. Who wants that, right? I do, but there's.
Boy, there was a time where everybody had stacks and stacks of TV guides. Do you remember that? Like nobody threw them away.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's fun now when you come upon some of those things. If you do go into a Goodwill or Salvation Army and you find a stack of TV guides.
Yeah.
From the 70s, it's kind of a find.
Well, right now I've just started listening to the audiobook of Mackenzie Phillips. She has a new memoir.
Mackenzie Phillips is in the daughter of John Phillips. Yeah, okay.
I'm really enjoying it for two reasons. Number one, it's all in her voice, not she's reading it, which is fantastic. It's her life story, which is harrowing, but also really beautiful. And so I'm really enjoying that. So I'm pretty completist about the 70s. So if something comes out of a star of that era, or whether it be television, or I try to get at least familiar with it. You can't follow everything, but you got to pick and choose. But it's really enjoying this memoir.
So is your interest in the 70s specifically American pop culture, or do you extend your interest to other countries and what was going on there? Because, for example, I think I've mentioned to you before that I really have been a lifelong kind of Anglophile. So I love a lot of British shows and British bands and, very, very into the UK. And I'm just wondering if you've ever kind of crossed over the ocean into what was happening in the 70s in the UK, because I have a feeling you'd find it very interesting.
Well, it depends on what it is. So the Two Ronnies, I'm a big fan of.
Okay.
Love the Two Ronnies. Are You Being Served is an iconic 70s show, which I love.
A great show.
But I'm also interested in the Mike Leigh series, Plays for a Day.
Oh God, it's great.
Like Abigail's Party. Meantime. That he did these little films for British television with Tim Roth and Alison Steadman and Gary Oldman. Those are really remarkable. And that's, but again, that's more about, that's also that it's Mike Leigh, that he's such a good writer.
God. One of my favorites.
Yeah, it isn't so much that it's 70s, although it is 70s. But, I like some of the 70s prog rock, and I like some of the 70s. I do like a lot of the 70s pop music. So certainly some of that's British.
For example, were you ever into, or have you ever seen Top of the Pops?
I watched it. I tried to.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's actually one of my favorite music programs of that era.
Yep.
I mean, of course, Top of the Pops went way on beyond the 70s, but the episodes from the 70s were, in my opinion, the best.
Yeah.
Some of them into the early 80s were pretty good too. So speaking of, now that we're talking about music, of course, you are a phenomenal musician.
Oh, thank you.
And so I'm very interested in hearing about your evolution as a musician as well. How long? When did you start playing? What was your training?
Well, I was trained in Tampa, Florida originally, in the 70s with an old school Italian piano teacher named Violetta Mendesi, who was an immigrant from Italy, and she lived with her cousin who was a cabinet maker, and they lived in the same house. And she was into opera, and she directed the chorus at the high school in Tampa. And she taught me piano lessons, and it was my first piece. So I owe a lot to her. Basic things, technique, and
as a younger musician, did you have aspirations even back then to become a professional musician or,
Totally. And in fact, here's what I would do. I would practice piano. And then because I was living in Tampa, I really liked the jazz artists that would come into town. And I would see everybody. And if they came into town, if it was George Benson coming into town, or, sometimes these would be kind of pop jazz people.
Yeah, George Benson.
But not only did I really go to all these concerts, I tried to do ear training and kind of pick out what they were doing, so a lot of my practice was just basically trying to learn this music, which is very hard. It was hard for me, in other words, because I had to, because I was learning in this classical style, which is all about the score. So I was kind of a divided consciousness. One part of me was working on the score, the sheet music, and then the other part of me was trying to, I guess, train my ears and figure this, other stuff out.
Right.
So
in terms of obviously your favorite music and the music that you seem to be most drawn to is jazz. That's kind of the genre that you're, you're most comfortable in. Mm-hmm. Are there other genres of music that you're interested in or that you like that somebody might not expect that you would like?
Oh, boy. I guess I am biased. I mean, I'd rather listen to Cedar Walton than Ben Folds 5.
Wow, you're the first person in the history of the human race to ever make that specific statement.
Well, yeah, you can't compare them, right? But they're both good. And so I'll say on the record, I love Ben Folds 5. But, it's true that's, I like anything piano-oriented. Like if it's piano rock, like Amanda Palmer. And
she's great. Yeah.
But that's just my piano anything that gets away from the guitar. I'm interested in the piano. So yeah, I'm biased towards the piano, I guess you would say. Yeah.
Okay. So just because you do have such a great ear for music, and I think, again, another thing you and I share is that I think we do tend to gravitate towards older music versus more contemporary music. Mm-hmm. However, there are some pretty formidable contemporary artists, and I think that, sometimes we kind of overlook them. Are there any off the top of your head that actually are just, really in the here and now?
Oh, it's hard.
That you really like.
It's really hard for me to speak about contemporary things because I don't follow it very closely. But I could tell you who I think is good that's beyond and contemporary. So I could tell you that I like Robert Glasper a lot.
I like.
Great. Then again, that's considered in the jazz category. I like.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to ask anybody for example, in the pop music world that you.
I don't really. I mean, would you consider Esperanza Spalding? Is she considered pop and jazz, or is she?
I don't think so. I think jazz. Really? I would say jazz. Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess Ben Folds 5 is considered out of date, right? That's older, right?
Well, I mean, is it older though? I mean, they still tour and they still, they're still highly relevant. I mean, they still have a very loyal fan base, and I definitely love that band too. And but I also don't know if I'd call that band pop either. It's really hard to. They're not an easy band to classify.
Yeah, I mean, I think a musician has to, in a way, pick and choose, and sometimes a musician wants to follow their muse rather than stay relevant or current.
Yeah,
and I guess I'm guilty of that. I'm not necessarily very relevant or current. I mean, I sort of know what's out there because it's in the air, and I sort of kind of know more about it than people would realize. Just because,
If you could change the landscape of contemporary pop music, how do you think you'd want to see it changed?
I would wish contemporary music, pop music, was a little less ambient.
Oh, that's interesting.
A little less electronic and had more harmonic development. I still think pop. This is why I like Robert Glasper or because his music has development in it, or even somebody like. And I also don't like the melodies of most pop singers. You know, they're not melodies aren't very good, and it's kind of they're just too. It's almost too circular and too.
I think you're right about that. I see what you mean now when you say, you know, ambient. It feels like everything is written these days to make sure that it can serve multiple functions. Like one, it has to sound good at the disco. It has to be able to draw people into the nightclub. Two, it's got to be able to. You have to be able to play it over the sound system of you know, an H&M store or at the supermarket.
Yeah.
And you know, or at the background of a party. So I get what you mean. It's something about modern, like contemporary pop music is just so much less.
But again, these things I've complained about are actually styles that people like. So again, and this is where I'm kind of relativistic. So a lot of contemporary pop music has one and then goes to the three. It goes back to the one, which is not very, you know, that's not really a lot. There's a kind of, or 1 to 6 to 1, the minor 6 to 1. And it kind of will do that for a while. And that gets very, it's just sort of, I don't know what the word is. It's a little, or, you know, a lot of melodies, they're a little, I guess they're too static, or they circle around 1 or 2 pitches, you know, and I sort of like a melody to have a little more development than that. But then again,
do you think that the reason modern pop songs are constructed this way is because that just is generally something like psychologically it's easy to digest?
Oh, you know, there's a lot of speculation. I mean, a lot of people, I'll tell you what I don't think it is. So I'm a very generous person. So I don't think it's connected to lack of training or talent or ability. I think it's an actual aesthetic preference. And I think it may have many complicated roots having to do with, it could just be familiarity. It's kind of what people have been conditioned to. You know, one person says, I do this, let's do this, and let's create this style and get it out there. And then that works. And so people repeat it.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I say psychologically easy to digest, you know?
Yeah. But I don't really think, again, just because I don't like a lot of it doesn't mean, number one, that I don't understand it. Because I do. And doesn't mean, number two, that I think it's objectively, like, wrong. It's just that I don't like it. I like to see alternatives to it because it just makes the musical landscape a little repetitive, you know.
Oh, yeah, very, very. And especially if you're a 70s scholar and you're appreciative of, you know, the music of the 70s. Because I know that you like disco, too.
I do. Well, disco had development, though. So
yeah,
so if we take a Fly Robin Fly or I don't know, it's just like the disco songs usually have a kind of a form to them, right? They have you're on a 7th chord, and then you're going to go to the 4, and then you go back to
there's a lot more movement around the musical scale in general
and also I like the instrumentation. Like I like the way it's mixed. I like the way they mixed the electric bass and the synths then, and I like the way the drummer was recorded. I mean, I saw a documentary from 60 Minutes with Dan Rather about this new crazy thing called disco music, and it's from 1978, and they actually go in and they actually film the recording of Betty Wright's song, I think, a Betty Wright disco. Oh. And they show all the session musicians and the overdubbing, and I really enjoyed watching that because I liked. There's a spiritual connection between what they're doing in that song and some of the minimalists, like some of what John Adams was doing or Terry Riley. There's a little bit of a overlap, right, in terms of just using these little motifs and repeating them. What Philip Glass was doing. See, I'm interested. See, because I'm a composer and I like to bring things together, I'm interested in the connections between things or how things are similar, more similar than we realize. So I was very excited to see that. I thought, oh, yeah, it's a little bit like because I saw Philip Glass in Bowling Green in the 80s perform. And that just blew my mind. Not that I necessarily like his music, but seeing that concert blew my mind, and just the
Yeah, I think people like Philip Glass, you know, him and maybe somebody like Laurie Anderson, they're very specific tastes, and I always put those two artists in a similar kind of, I don't like to use the word box, but let's just use the word box for simplicity's sake, because it seems to be that people really love or hate
Yeah.
Philip Glass, and it's the same with Laurie Anderson. I'm with you. Like, I couldn't say I'm a Philip Glass fan, but I could also say that when I hear his music, I feel affected.
Yeah.
You know, Laurie Anderson, I feel very affected by this music, but I'm not sure that I'd want to put it on and listen to it voluntarily.
Well, people might be surprised to learn that I love the Velvet Underground, and maybe not surprised. They might be surprised to know that I love the Ramones.
Now that actually does surprise me.
But but the Ramones
I'm not surprised about the Velvet Underground, but the Ramones is a new one. That's interesting. I wouldn't have imagined that you're a Ramones fan.
Well, because the music sounds good. Like, I actually think their drummer was sort of innovative, and in the tempo and the way they play tempos is beautiful. And I like it's for me, everything is how does it sound? And to me, the Ramones sound good. Like, they're appealing, and the way they do these really fast songs, and those tempos are kind of hard to do, and I admire that. And there's also an energy and excitement of Lobotomy, and I think it's really there. It isn't. I'm not like totally an anti-rock person, obviously, because I love Let It Bleed, and I love Ramones, and I like some Zeppelin. But
okay.
I like Peter Frampton comes. So again, but even though so-called jazz is my favorite music, I do, I listen to a lot of different things. So I also like a lot of R&B, like a lot of soul. I like Teddy Pendergrass and Marvin Gaye.
So your taste really runs the spectrum, and that's what I was trying to get at. Is I think that somebody could easily get this idea about you that you really only live in jazz and don't really venture outside of that.
Yeah.
So one last question for you, Mitch, since we're coming up on time.
Yes.
You're also a philosopher.
Yes.
And I have often enjoyed your philosophical musings that you post.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear about your evolution as a philosopher as well, because you have to understand, you're a very interesting guy. You're a guy who's a dandy. You're a very very classically trained musician and a scholar of the 70s, a philosopher. You're really a modern day Renaissance man. And
I try to be actually. I sort of like the Renaissance, but philosophically, I've gone through many changes. So I'll try to be very brief. Do you have more questions?
Yeah, well, go ahead. Give the honest answer. What started your interest in philosophy? Because again, most people aren't interested in philosophy, and you and I talked about this recently. That part of I think what the intellectual, the anemic intellectual nature of most societies now is that people are not interested in philosophy or any particular disciplines that force you to think critically, to actually develop your critical thinking skills. So how did that happen for you? And how did you develop?
I was inspired by my first year at New England Conservatory of Music, 1985. I had a mentor there named Sandra Joshua. Sandra took me aside and said, "Mitch, you're bright, but you need to be reading these books." And she made me a list. And it was Michel Foucault, The History of Sexuality.
Wow.
Derrida, of Grammatology, Spivak's translation. She had me read this. Baudrillard.
So you're reading Foucault and Derrida and all these French philosophers at a very young age.
Not only at very young, I'm reading them, and sometimes in their very early. So when they start to become a sensation. I actually attended a seminar on Judith Butler around the time Gender Trouble was in was at manuscript form. So I was very actually inducted into this very postmodern, post-structuralist, French-oriented, Hegelian, European mindset. And I was marinated in that. 10 years.
What a great word to use. You were marinated in a particular philosophical school.
But here's what happened. 10 years later, I got bit by an English bug. And I revolted against that and started reading Hume and started reading. I fell in love with Isaiah Berlin and Stuart Hampshire and Bernard Williams, which those folks, very English, and all those folks are very suspicious and skeptical about the French. But now I've come full circle because I'm reading all late Foucault now. So I'm actually kind of, and also theologically, I became very interested in Christianity. That's a more recent interest, but my interest in Christianity is very radical. And I'm sure a lot of Christians would not recognize it as Christian, probably,
Probably not.
Probably not. But I'm also very interested in Zen thought. And there is definitely a thought to Zen. Zen is not, I think the Zen, the scriptures. And so I have, I'm a speed reader, so I'm able to sort of get into all this stuff. So I could go in any direction you want to go. But as far as what I am not, I don't know. I just, I'm trying to blend things together that don't seem to go together. So I sort of say, well, what does the continent have to offer that the pragmatic empiricists don't? And vice versa, right? So I try to combine that. And what are the Christians? What is what I call real Christianity, which for me is radically distinct from historical Christianity, which historical Christianity is a disaster, ethically. Philosophical. No, it's just a nightmare. But that's totally different than really, if somebody is a serious thinker, theologian, that's totally different. But I also I read a lot of secular thought. Of course, I listen to Sam Harris's podcast. He's an atheist, and his atheism is irritating to me because I don't think. He has a very weird definition of I don't know, of a lot of things, but he he has guests on his show I like, and so I'm not one of these people. I don't believe that the world works. I don't think that there's a person in a throne sending people to hell and sending people to heaven. I just don't think the world works that way. And I'm not going to let people that do think the world works that way ruin my life, and I'm not going to pay any attention to them.
That's a really great note to end on. Yeah. Don't let people who think the world works that way ruin your life. I think that is a great way to move forward.
Yeah.
As an American living in this age and time.
Oh boy.
Mitch, this has been really illuminating, fascinating, and I thank you so much for letting me pose these really personal questions to you that I think a lot of your listeners are going to be curious to hear your answers.
Okay.
Because, you're always on the other side of the mic. Yeah. So I really appreciate the opportunity to turn the tables on you and put you in the hot seat for a change.
Well, merci beaucoup. Thank you. You're a great interviewer. I think you should do this.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a great interviewer. It's definitely a skill that I'm willing to work on. I used to do interviews when I worked for a regional film festival. I did in-person on-stage interviews with filmmakers back then. So I used to get a lot better at it. But it also helps to have a good, subject who can elaborate on answers and really give of yourself. I think that's what makes a good interview subject, is somebody who's willing to give of themselves. And you're always willing to do that. So thanks so much,
Thank you.
Mitch.
This is going to be I look forward to hearing listener feedback.
Yeah, I really hope that the couple of call drops you're able to kind of edit out or stitch together seamlessly.
Okay, well,
but yeah, it's been really fun, and I hope you'll let me do this again with a whole different set of questions next time.
Yeah, I think it's a plan. I'll definitely we'll remind each other to do that.
Great. Yeah. That sounds really great.
Bye-bye.
Well, Mitch Hampton, everyone. Big applause.
Oh, boy. Take care. Be safe.
See you next time. Bye, Mitch.
Mm-hmm. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Hello.
Hello, Madam B.
Yeah, that's me. How's it going, Mitch?
It's good. This connection sounds pretty good.
Okay. Are you taping right now, or?
This is the episode.
Oh, this is the episode. Okay, so there's no prep, no nothing. We're just.
Well, there's always prep. I mean, but it's not. But I'd like to say a few words up front, if I may.
Okay.
Some of my guests I actually know personally, and then there are other guests who I've never met, but I know their accomplishments or things they've achieved in the arts usually, or things related to aesthetics. And then you're in a category all your own because you're somebody that I actually know, but not in person. It's not in physical person. I know long distance or right. So
yeah, it's been a phenomenon of the whole pandemic, the whole plague era that I'm hearing about a lot of friendships being forged across long distances. And you're one, and there've been a couple of others, but yeah, I mean, I think our friendship has been the best thing to come out of the plague for me.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear you say that. I thought it was a little bit older than that because, I've known you, I guess, because of Anna Biller and a couple other people. So.
Oh yeah, that's true, but I don't think you and I ever spoke or, really had real one-on-one communication. Before the plague, so.
Right. I mean, it's interesting when you said across the Atlantic Sea, I thought of the song from Hair. That song, I'm a Genius, I believe.
Yeah, of course.
That's me. What is it? Pekowski finds this groovy to hide in a movie, pretends he's Fellini and Antonioni, and also his cousin Roman Polanski all rolled into one.
Yeah.
The Atlantic Sea, because you're across the Atlantic Sea, right?
I'm across the Atlantic Ocean, yeah.
Yeah, so... where did you want to begin? Because I know that I did want to discuss, what it's like to be an expatriate.
Well, I guess, like you were saying, first of all, I'm kind of flattered that you asked me to do this because I listen to your podcast and I'm definitely not in a league with any of the people that have ever been on your podcast. So, let me be the first to say I don't have a pile of books or other extraordinary accomplishments. But I guess in this day and age, especially with the political environment you're experiencing in the U.S. right now, I guess my accomplishment has been that I did the thing that I hear so many of my friends and acquaintances who are still in the States constantly talking about, what they wish they could do is I want to leave America. I want to move to Europe. I want to move anywhere. I want to get out of here.
Wow.
And so it seems that, I don't give myself enough credit probably for the fact that I actually did that. Yeah. I'm one of those rare people that actually did leave America, but I didn't leave recently. I've been in Europe for almost 14 years now. So it's, 13 or 14 years. I've been here a very long time.
That is a long time. So you sort of came over. That's interesting. I mean, do you mind getting into some details about your earlier life? Because I know, there's certain things I can talk about, certain things, I want to be respectful of the guest. And I know that you have a Chicago roots. Is this true? Or?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So just a little brief bit of background. I'm from I have a multi-ethnic background. My mom is Thai. My father was a Kentucky hillbilly. And so I spent most of my childhood, my formative years were spent between Chicago, Thailand, and Japan, actually, where my father was stationed at the time. So I didn't actually end up living in Chicago full time until I was about 6 years old. And so I always consider Chicago my true home. That's where my heart will always be, no matter where I am in the world. Chicago's the place I always want to go back to, that I always kind of long for. So I was a Chicago girl until I was about 18, and then I moved to London.
Wow.
And over the course of my life, so I've lived in a number of different cities, and I do have this kind of a wanderlust. And over the years, I did London, and then I moved back to the States. I ended up in Florida for quite a while. And then up to New England for a little bit, then New York City, then from New York City to Germany, then Germany to France. So my first steps onto European soil were actually Germany. And I've been in France now almost 6 years.
That itinerary is much. I mean, that's a resume itinerary that's very similar to many journalists and reporters or people that That's quite a lot of travel.
Well, my father, in fact, was a journalist, so that probably has something to do with it. During his years in the military, he was an editor for Stars and Stripes.
Oh, wow.
Now defunct, but then for the rest of his civilian career, he was an editor for Time Life books. If you remember those like collections of books, like encyclopedia-like books. Yeah. He was one of the editors on those books. So that's, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of in my blood. And I think my father also had this wanderlust. And so, I start to get real antsy after a few years. Like, I've been in France 6 years now, and I'm already like, okay, which country are we going to next, But I think we're going to be here for quite a while because my husband is French, so.
Sure, wow. Well, it's interesting because, I remember the Time Life. That's a very 70s
it is
phenomenon, those Time Life books. I know that I have a couple that it's a way to try to encapsulate. I know I send you things to tease you about being from Chicago. I'll send you Mike Royko archives.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Yeah, I love all the Chicago things. Yeah,
Bob Newhart stuff and all that. And I just don't know. So there must be a big change if you're in London, and then there's a lot of jokes. Well, there used to be a lot of jokes about England versus France, and
those jokes still very much exist, especially in my household. I have a very, very French husband who doesn't seem to grasp British humor, or at least doesn't like it, put it that way. And so we have a good laugh about the Brits. But I myself, oddly enough, I would describe myself more as an Anglophile. I've never been a Francophile. And so it's very interesting to me to talk to friends whom I would describe them as kind of Francophiles who have never actually lived here. And their idea of France is, it's kind of a caricature,
Yeah.
It's not really what it's like here. So, and in terms of me being an expat, I actually don't describe myself that way. I describe myself as an immigrant. I feel that the word expat is loaded with kind of, I don't know. I don't understand why we use expat for some people and immigrant for others. And the only distinguishing characteristic that I can find is that it seems to be that like white people get expat and anybody of, color gets immigrant. And so I'm an immigrant here, and I'm having an immigrant experience here. So I identify as an immigrant in France, definitely.
Well, I'm really happy to hear you talk about that, and if you want to, you can even talk more. I only use that word out of kind of custom. If you recall, I was not wedded to it in any respect.
Yeah, no, I think just technically speaking, an expatriate is somebody who leaves their homeland, moves to another country, and relinquishes citizenship of their home country. So this is something I haven't done yet. I still do hold an American passport. I still am an American citizen. I am a French resident, and I haven't chosen yet to become a French citizen because to do that, you have to relinquish I would have to relinquish my American citizenship.
Wow.
And despite everything, I'm not quite ready to do that.
So you're an immigrant living in Paris, right?
Yes.
You're living in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I really I just marvel at that.
Well, your podcast is called The Journey of an Aesthete. So, if you're talking about an aesthetic sensibility, Paris is it. You move here and you suffer all of these hardships to live here Because when you walk out the door and you just walk down any random street here, Marie Kondo, the organizing specialist, she talks about, only keeping things in your life that spark joy. And, no matter what you think of her, there is something to that principle. And when you walk down the street here, you will see things every 10 seconds that spark joy. It could be something as seemingly, banal as some bricks on a building, or it could be the, Petit Palais, or the Eiffel Tower, of course, or Montmartre. It could be any number of things, small and, massive here, that spark joy. So the whole experience of walking through the city is a joyful, aesthetic experience. You feel like you're in a snow globe when you're walking around. I mean, you've been here, so I know you understand this.
Yeah, well, I was there. Last time I was there was some time ago. It was for my father's wedding, my late father's wedding at the American Church. And I'm sure you've seen the American Church.
Yes, and the thing is, if you were to come here now, you would certainly see, that, there has been some modernization of the city. I mean, I think probably when you were here, for example, the whole La Défense probably didn't exist yet, but it doesn't really change that much. If you look at really all of the old movies, all of the old French New Wave movies that which is where everybody seems to get a lot of their romantic ideas about Paris, seems to come from either the French New Wave movies or even earlier than that. If you're talking about literally An American in Paris, that film, I think a lot of people get their idea about Paris from movies. And when you come here, just like with any major city where, there's this whole mythology that's built up by cinema, the real life thing is not like that. What you're seeing in the movies and in postcards and whatnot, it's a construct. So,
sure.
But,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think if I understand what you're saying to a point, I mean, I feel, so there are movies that I've experienced that I think dispel that. In other words, they're actually sort of accurate. And off the top of my head, I'm going to name a movie, Vendredi Soir.
Vendredi Soir.
Okay. Soir. Yeah, I don't pronounce right. Does that movie have a bit of a traffic jam and just this beautiful? Isn't there a bit of the real Paris in that?
Yes, I mean, of course, yeah. There are definitely movies that depict Paris in a much more realistic way than the more romanticized version of it. There was a movie that came out many, many years ago, and it was a set of vignettes. To be honest, it's not a great movie, but if you're looking for Paris-related film to watch, and I think it was simply called Paris, I Love You.
Yeah, I saw it.
Paris, Je t'aime. Yeah. And it's just vignettes. And actually, I find the shots in that movie and the depiction of, kind of normal Parisian life to be more accurate than I've seen in something like Amélie, for example, which is a lot of, magic realism.
Yeah.
Like if you go to the bar restaurant that's featured in Amélie that everyone's so in love with, when you go there in person, it's nothing to shout about at all. It's just like you walk up to and you're like, wow, that's it, really? Because I can find a better place, like 2 blocks away. It just proves to you the magic of cinema, and how you can, really distort reality from behind the lens. And I have I really have a great respect for anybody who can do that. Because they're I think, a movie like Amélie is actually like a moving painting. It's a moving painting of a very idealized Paris.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, how do you feel about something like La Maman et le Putain? Rivette's early 70s.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, films that we could reference that evoke, each one evokes its own specific feeling. And as I do have a preference for films of the 70s. With regards to French film, though, I'd say my preference is even more in the 60s.
Yeah.
So late 60s, early 70s is it for me. But yeah, I think that in terms of living here and assimilating into French culture and Parisian culture and French society in general, it's not what a lot of people might think it is. I think a lot of, like I was saying, a lot of my friends are just, oh my God, you live in Paris. Oh, it's so romantic. It's really not. It's really not. Paris is a very gritty place, believe it or not. There are certain sections of the city, certain arrondissements are much more like, wow, this is the postcard Paris. If you're walking around, the grounds around the Louvre, the Jardin Luxembourg and all of that, it's like, whoa, this is, you can really feel like you're in a fairy tale, especially if you happen to be lucky enough to be walking through those areas when it's not crowded. That's actually been one of the, I have to admit, it's one of the best things about this pandemic year is that the city is just emptied out. It just emptied out like right away. And you get to see the city in a way that you've never seen it before, because normally it's so crowded with tourists and traffic and, commuters and everybody else. And it was the very first time, for example, that I saw a completely empty metro station. Wow. With like nobody walking down the halls, nobody on the escalator, nobody on the stairs, nobody on the platform. I had never experienced that before. It was kind of eerie, but also really kind of cool. Like, wow, like this is kind of very surreal to be, on, line 13 or line 14, even, more so, where there's just nobody around. And it's the same like walking through any public space here. We have a lot of like beautiful liminal spaces in Paris. And usually they don't feel very liminal because they're so crowded with humans. And then to have all of those humans suddenly just wiped out of the picture, to go over and like just stand in front of these big, vast spaces in the city, it's been an incredible experience, and I'm going to treasure that aspect of this forever.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what other we have just about, I think, 15 more minutes or so. In that amount of time, would you want to evoke for the listener, and this is maybe too big a question or too large a topic, the experience of living in Paris for as long as you have overall, and what things are unique about that kind of life, whether it's diet or how food is prepared or just, I don't know, weather, climate, anything.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, where to begin? Okay. So, we can start with the climate, just because this week we are having incredibly bipolar weather, which is pretty typical of the climate here. It's a very oceanic climate. A lot of rain, a lot of clouds, and those clouds, I'm not complaining about them at all. Just want to go on the record. I'm actually not complaining about the rain and the clouds, because I love rain and clouds. And they're often part of the, they're often part of the scene. They're just part of the scenery. I couldn't picture Paris without the clouds. In fact, when it's a bright, beautiful, so-called beautiful sunny day with blue skies, I'm just not really into it. I want the clouds. Yeah. So, I'd say first of all, between your typical American lifestyle and French lifestyle, and especially living in Paris, in a big city like this, it's not a car society here, although it is a car society when you leave Paris. When you go anywhere else in France, pretty much, you have, a lot of people living in kind of rural or semi-rural or suburban areas where you've got to have a car, even if you just want to go shopping. So, life here is predominantly on foot, on public transport, or on small wheels, bicycles. The big thing now, of course, are these little razor scooters that it's not just little kids riding them now. It's full grown adults riding these scooters everywhere. Yeah. They're convenient, I guess, and they they get you from point A to point B without ever having to set foot on public transport if you don't want to. And since the plague began, I've seen a lot more people getting more into razor scooters and roller skates and even skateboards. It's been kind of cool to see this. So that's the first thing I think that's different is that, things here they're just not really convenient or comfortable. And one of the biggest adjustments you have to make moving to this particular city is you have to get used to being uncomfortable. You have to just kind of accept that life is inconvenient, uncomfortable a lot of the time compared to what your experience is as an American living in, a nice big house with a car, access to whatever you want any time of the day because everyth's open 24 hours a day. We don't have that here.
Right.
So, that's a good way to seg into the food culture. The way that French people eat is nothing like the way Americans eat. And I'm not saying that in a kind of, I don't mean that to be a patronizing statement, but it is just different. And that's another thing that you have to get used to here. So, for example, the French really eat 3 meals a day. And as a general rule, they don't snack. So just a quick funny story. The first time I went to a French supermarket, and I just kind of walked past the section that had, things like potato chips and Doritos. It's a very small section here. You know how in the States it's like a whole aisle and there's 80,000 different flavors of Doritos and, 50, there's just so many flavors and varieties of chips and snacks and that kind of food. And here it's a really small section by comparison in any supermarket. And for the longest time, I just couldn't understand what the consumption occasion was for those types of products here because nobody I knew ate those things. I never saw people snacking. My husband doesn't snack. Nobody in his family snacks. They just don't snack here. And then I realized that those kinds of foods, those snacky foods, things that Americans will just, eat sitting in front of the TV, watching Netflix in your underwear, those types of snacky foods are generally reserved for what's called the apéro here, which is like this cocktail time. It's like cocktail and snacks. And it's just generally something you have before a big dinner, with the family or with a group of friends, or you might invite friends over just for a drink. And you would also put out these little kinds of snacky foods for that. But in general, you don't see people just walking around with bags of chips here. And again, in general, people just don't walk and eat at the same time either.
Wow.
They just don't. Food is very, very important to the French, and the feeling among this society is if something is good enough to eat, show it the respect to sit down and savor it. So you might see somebody just sucking down a croissant early in the morning if they're rushing to work. But as a general rule, it's just not done. You sit down for your.
I hold that thought. I'm sorry. So it's just basically almost a taboo, or it sort of expresses a kind of a lack of respect for food and diet. That in custom. I think that's exactly right. That there's a general feeling that this is a culture that also values just a kind of self-care and self-nourishing. That, if you're going to respect the food and respect yourself, sit down, eat your food, enjoy it. Don't just suck it down. You're not even tasting it. You're just running, to work and eating at the same time. It's just not done here. You don't even really see people walking around with cups of Starbucks around here. I usually get called out really fast for being an American because I'm the one walking down the street with a Starbucks, drinking as I walk. That's not really done here that much. So when you spot those people, right away that they're Americans, or in some cases they might be British. Because the British have adopted a lot of American habits, so that's one of them.
And so, that adjusting to the different way that French people eat has been very, it was a really big challenge in the beginning. Now it's fine. But in the beginning, I was kind of a person where in terms of food and eating, I'm kind of a grazer, I like cooking, but I'm not one of those people that ever really did the 3 meals a day thing. It's like, if I feel hungry one day for breakfast, I'll have breakfast. I might skip lunch. I might, for dinner have tuna and crackers. They don't really do that kind of thing here. It's breakfast is taken at home.
Yes.
And typical French breakfast, most French are going to eat something like yogurt with granola or some cereal or tartine, which is just a fancy word for bread with jam or butter on it. That's about it. And then, lunch, you would kind of have something a little more proper, and dinner is usually going to be something, a hot meal.
Well, even good things have to conclude, and so we're coming upon the conclusion of this portion of our plan. Did you want to talk at all, or do you mind discussing your plans for the future with regard to possibly communicating to the public about French life, or do you have plans in that regard? Or?
I do. I mean, I am in the process of putting together a YouTube channel where I am going to do videos about probably mostly French food, French cooking, French food history. This is my primary area of interest these days is food. So, and I think especially because now that we've experienced life without restaurants, more people than ever have gotten into cooking at home and experimenting with recipes and, just getting more interested in food in general, where, prior to this, it was a much more, go out to eat kind of a society. So, I think I am in the process of doing that, and I'll let you know as soon as it's up and running.
Well, yeah, that's important because we'll definitely link to it when we release this episode, if it's up and running by then, which it might be. Who knows? But
we'll see.
I'm very excited about your channel. I think it will be a good channel, and I think
so too, actually.
And I think, given your, I'm really thankful for your generosity and time, because I think a lot of people can speak about a lot of things. But one of the things I want to say in conclusion is that you're very, you're very clear. A listener audience understands where you're coming from, and you speak well. And I really appreciative of that fact. And so thank you for that.
Well, I got me one of them American diplomas, Mitch, from a big old American university. So I'm getting to put my big old American vocabulary to use.
Is that what it is? Or I don't know.
I don't know. I think I'm just a gabber, in general, and I enjoy conversation, and I really appreciate you having me on to talk. I always enjoy talking to you anyway, so yeah, the fact that other people can hear us talking to each other, I guess that's
that's the point.
A good thing.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Well, merci beaucoup, and
je t'en prie.
Oui, and I'll see you in the next edition. Thank you.
All right, Mitch. Have a good one. Thanks a lot. À bientôt. Ciao.
I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.